Hello and welcome to Trails Worth Hiking, the show that brings you some of the most interesting backpacking and trekking routes in the world. I'm your host, Jeremy Pendry. In the first part of the show, we bring you the story and history of a trail. Then we tell you what it's like to hike the trail and how you can do it. On this episode, we are going through hiking for more than a month. We'll be hiking almost 500 miles through several different mountain ranges, each with its own distinct character, but all part of the biggest mountain system in North America. We'll ascend and descend around 90,000 feet, or 27,400 meters, and spend most of the hike above 10,000 feet, or 3,000 meters in elevation. And we'll experience some tough mountain weather. And this account will be firsthand as I tell you about my longest hike yet. Think of it as my report about how I spent my summer vacation. Yep, on this episode of Trails Worth Hiking, we'll hike from Denver to Durango through the Rocky Mountains on the Colorado Trail. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm really excited to bring you this episode. We're going to be talking about the Colorado Trail. There's a lot of great stuff to cover, but first I want to remind you to follow us on Instagram at Trails Worth Hiking Podcast. A huge thank you to our sponsor, Outdoor Herbivore, which provides vegetarian and vegan backpacking meals that everyone will enjoy. They use quality ingredients and ship worldwide. Outdoor Herbivore sponsored my Colorado Trail thru hike, and they sponsor this episode. They provided me resupply shipments throughout the hike. I essentially ordered food online as I went. Their resupply service worked beautifully throughout the hike. I'll discuss it in more detail when we talk about the resupply strategy in the logistics section of the discussion. But I want to tell you now that Outdoor Herbivore has a new discounted Trails Worth Hiking meal package. As my hike on the trail evolved, I found myself relying more and more on repeat meals that I preferred. So here is what Outdoor Herbivore and I have done to put together a new meal packet for you. We thought about if I had to pick one meal to eat for breakfast, one meal to eat for lunch, and one meal to eat for dinner that I would have to eat every day, what would those meals be? So here it is. That's what we're bringing you as a meal packet. For breakfast, it's the Toasted Sunburst Muesli. This is basically an oatmeal plus nuts, dried fruits, and seeds, and it's pretty close to what I eat every day of my life at home anyway, so for me this is also perfect on the trail. For lunch, it's the Hop Pea Slop. It's a great name, I know. I could not have predicted that this would be my favorite Outdoor Herbivore, no-cook, cold-soaked meal for lunch, but it is. It's peas, onions, and a creamy dill sauce. I usually put half of it into a couple of tortillas and then finish the rest with my spork. This was really a hidden gem for me on their available meals, and I think you'll enjoy it too. And then for dinner, this was a tough call in thinking about this one, but I decided to go with the Naked Freckle Burrito. If I had to eat one meal every day, it would definitely be a burrito, even if I had already had tortillas with lunch. It may seem like a small touch, but the fact that it comes with an optional packet of Cholula sauce makes it even better. Always opt for the Cholula sauce. To get your Outdoor Herbivore Trails Worth Hiking Colorado Trail meal package at a 20% discount to the regular price, so a pretty significant discount, go to Outdoor Herbivore right now and enter the discount code TWHCT, Trails Worth Hiking Colorado Trail, to get the new discounted Trails Worth Hiking meal package. Again, that discount code is TWHCT, Trails Worth Hiking Colorado Trail. Thanks again to Outdoor Herbivore for sponsoring the hike and the show. Definitely get this meal packet. You won't regret it. I'll talk more about their resupply service a little bit later in the show. All right, so let's start at the beginning, and that means going way back. When I was 7 years old, my parents, brother and sister, and I piled into the family station wagon. I think at the time it was an AMC Eagle. The car was piled high with camping gear, and we drove from the San Francisco Bay Area to Aspen, Colorado. At the time, Aspen was not quite yet the shishi hangout that it has since become. It had a touch of that already, but it was also still a modest Colorado mountain town like many others. Shortly before this trip, my parents, along with two good friends, had purchased 2 empty acres of land on a hill outside of Aspen, beyond the airport, at the junction between Aspen and Snowmass, in an area called Brush Creek Village. So we drove out to Colorado and up the dirt road to our land, and we set up 2 tents. One for us, which we had borrowed, and a smaller tent that ended up essentially being our closet to hold all of our gear. There was no water on the property, so we only had bottled water we bought. And we had a fold-out toilet seat that we would put over a hole we dug in the ground and then moved every so often. My father, who was an elementary school teacher, was going through a career crisis at the time, on the heels of California's Proposition 13 passing, which if you're from California, you know all about. And although this was good for property owners who were worried about losing their homes, it resulted in lower property taxes being collected, and California, as a result, fired thousands of teachers, including my father. He had spent the year teaching daycare instead and was considering a career change. Though a footnote to that, he eventually did end up back teaching again. But this was kind of at a tough moment, and this trip was, I think, a way to reflect on where we were in life and what the next steps might be. In any event, he got a job for the summer working for Pitkin County, where Aspen is, and the county office where he worked had a shower we could use occasionally. So that's how we kept clean during the summer, although we weren't that clean, to be honest. And so we spent our summer camping on our property. I played Little League for the first time over the summer and was probably the only kid in Aspen Little League living in a tent. To make a long story short, I still remember that summer as the best and most fun summer of my childhood. We lived outside with room to roam. My brother and I built entire towns in the dirt out of sticks that we found on the ground. My sister literally ate dirt and got pinworms. I caught my first trout in Maroon Bell Lake. In the afternoons, we sat and watched lightning storms on the other side of the valley. Sometimes we ate breakfast on a bench outside the Aspen airport and watched the planes land. And we even went and saw John Denver perform outside in the Rocky Mountains. It really doesn't get better than that. So fast forward several decades. About 10 years ago, I started dreaming about hiking in Colorado and learned that there was a trail that covered a good chunk of the Rockies in Colorado. And I even bought the guidebook for the Colorado Trail. But there it sat on my shelf for years and years. After COVID helped put life in perspective for all of us, I came out of it thinking it was finally time to do this. And my kids were off in college and beyond. Anyway, in 2022, I almost tried to pull off the Colorado Trail, but I have to admit I chickened out. And instead, I did the 12 hikes in 12 months challenge that I talked about in episode 36. So go back and listen to that if you want to hear about me attempting to do an outdoor trip every month of the year. I did that at the time because I wasn't sure how to pull off leaving work for long enough to do the Colorado Trail, but I knew I could do lots of weekend trips or shorter trips. But as wonderful as that challenge to myself was, and it did go well, what I really wanted to do was a big thru hike, and in particular, the Colorado Trail. The PCT has always been in my sights, I admit, but that discussion is for another day. So for reasons I won't go into, I gave myself a deadline and decided 2024 had to be the year. And then, unfortunately, in late 2023, my father ended up in the hospital and passed away soon after that. And I thought, well, it's now or never, isn't it? And that was it. There was no turning back. I had to go spend my summer walking in the Rocky Mountains. I've been backpacking for decades, but I still hadn't hiked in the Rocky Mountains where I spent that wonderful summer with my family. There's a lot to talk about here, and you won't just hear from me. I have some wonderful audio from some of the fantastic people I met on the Colorado Trail, some of whom I now consider good friends. So let's begin, as always, with where and what this hike is, and then we'll come back to the insights I have to offer around doing a thru hike like this, and the logistics of this hike in particular. And finally, we'll walk through it, including with input from some of my fellow hikers that I met on the trail. So let's start with the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are a 3,000-mile belt, so that's about 4,800 kilometers, of mountains from western Canada to New Mexico. They're 70 to 300 miles wide as well. The mountains are 40 to 90 million years old. It was long thought that it was one tectonic plate crash that caused the uplift of these mountains around 90 million years ago. But recent studies have led scientists to believe that it was actually two separate phases of uplift, with the most recent maybe only 40 million years ago. Whether it was one or two uplifts, the uplifts that occurred were actually a second formation of these mountains. There was a prior mountain range, now called the ancestral Rocky Mountains, formed during the late Paleozoic era, 320 to 280 million years ago. But they eroded, and then they were uplifted again to form the current Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are the largest mountain system in North America. It's really a distinct series of mountain ranges with distinct origins in some respects. As I learned from walking through the Rockies, different ranges within the Rockies can look and feel very different from each other. Most of the tallest peaks of the Rockies are in Colorado. Mount Elbert at 4,400 meters or 14,440 feet high is the highest peak. And by the way, Elbert is easily accessible from the trail if you want to do it as a side trip. Mount Massive is also accessible near Mount Elbert, and San Luis Peak is another 14er you can reach pretty easily from the trail. I didn't tackle any of the 14ers on my hike. I really didn't want to deviate from the task at hand, which was the trail in front of me. In my view, the trail was tough enough without putting in extra work to climb several thousand feet. And I guess I'm more of a pass bagger than a peak bagger. So I didn't hit these 14ers. I've done some in California, but I stayed on the trail. One of the biggest prominent features of the trail and of the Rockies is the Continental Divide. So this is the dividing line between water flowing west to the Pacific Ocean and east to the Atlantic. And the water that flows east also includes water flowing to the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, the Arctic, and Hudson Bay. And as many of you may know, there's actually a trail that is around 3,000 miles long that traverses the entire Continental Divide. And it overlaps with the Colorado Trail for 319 miles if you take one route, and a little bit less if you take a different route, which we'll talk about. The Colorado Trail crosses the divide many, many times, and it's one of the really cool things about hiking this trail is being up on those exposed ridges where you're on the Continental Divide. There is rich flora and fauna on this trail, and I saw a lot of it. There's deer, elk, and moose, all of which I saw. There's bighorn sheep, there's mountain goat, there's marmot, pika, beaver, porcupine. There are bears, but primarily at lower elevations, as we'll talk about. There's pine marten, there's coyotes, there's even a recent reintroduction of wolves. There's grouse, ptarmigan, osprey, and some other raptors, though I saw less raptors here than I've seen on trips in California where I live. There's woodpeckers, Canada jays, robins, and lots of other birds. There's also diverse flora. There's sagebrush areas. There's pine and fir, ponderosa, Douglas fir, lodgepole pine, Engelmann spruce, and subalpine fir, to name a few. There are lots of aspen groves. There's areas of alpine tundra as well. One thing I want to highlight about the flora that is important to think about is the problem of bark beetle infestation. There are huge swaths of trees for a significant portion of the trail that are just dead. The mountain pine beetle and spruce beetle are responsible for the dead trees, though the problem that allows them to kill the trees is climate change. Warmer winters means the beetles can reproduce more times per year, and it also weakens the trees' defenses by reducing their resin production, and resin helps protect the trees from the beetles normally. Also, there is higher forest density than there had been historically due to forest management practices over the decades, and that allows the bark beetles to spread faster. These trees can be dangerous. They fall down. Nationwide, 100,000 trees per day fall down as a result of this. I don't know how many of those are in Colorado, but the bottom line is it poses a threat. I felt uncomfortable camping near these dead trees. In some areas, that made finding a site challenging. I noticed that it didn't affect the southern portion of the trail very much. The trees there seem to all be alive. Currently, there's no solution to bark beetle infestation, though genetic resistance by some trees is being studied to find a solution. There's also impressive wildflowers on this hike. They change with elevation and latitude. I'm not much of a flower expert, so I'll just say that generally they were stunning. In some areas, they were diverse in color, shape, and size. In other areas, they were blankets of the same color, like yellow or purple. The photos never really do wildflowers justice. You really need to be there to really appreciate them. As far as human history in the area, the Ute tribe of Native Americans was there by the 1300s in southern Colorado. By the 1600s, the Ute tribe had moved into west central Colorado. Later, the Comanche, Arapaho, and Cheyenne moved into parts of Colorado. And it wasn't always peaceful between these tribes. The word Comanche is derived from the Ute word for enemy. The Utes were a nomadic people that followed game. They were probably originally from the Great Plains. And one of the things that allowed them to move so far west is they were one of the early tribes to use horses after the Spanish brought them to the continent. They traded with the Spanish as far back as the 1580s. The Utes had valuable deer skins that Europeans wanted. Horses dramatically changed their way of living. Horsemanship became very important, and this allowed the Utes to develop a more offensive warrior culture. In the 19th century, unfortunately, they were moved to reservations. And it was really precious mineral mining that pushed out the Utes. There were treaties that were broken, there were conflicts. Fighting broke out in 1879, and then a final treaty removed the Utes from the Rockies. Today, there are 3 Ute reservations, 1 in Utah and 2 in Colorado, and there are only a few thousand Utes remaining. Among Europeans, the Spanish were the first there, as I mentioned. This is obvious to me in California, but I didn't realize how much of Colorado's first Europeans were also Spanish. It's in the names. There's the La Garita Mountains, the San Juan Mountains, La Plata Mountains, Sangre de Cristo Mountains. There are towns like Buena Vista and Salida, Salida being an anglicized pronunciation of Salila, which means exit. In 1765, Juan Maria de Rivera described the mineral wealth of the area. In 1776, Fathers Dominguez and Escalante were looking for a route to California and went through present-day Durango. And a few years later, Juan Bautista de Anza came through pursuing Comanche bands. He traveled through the San Luis Valley, the San Juan Mountains, and the Cochetapa Hills. By the early 1800s, there was what's called the Spanish Trail that went through Colorado. And that was primarily from around 1829 to 1848. The Spanish Trail was a 2,700-mile trade route from Santa Fe, New Mexico to Los Angeles, California. Mexico's independence in the early 1820s allowed the route to open up to trade with the U.S. During the hike, there was actually a sign that had info on the route. And I noticed on the sign a description of one person who had traveled the route that had the last name Arce, which is my wife's maiden name. Her father's family is from northern Mexico originally. But it's a very common last name in Latin America, so likely no relation, but who knows. In 1848, the U.S. won a war with Mexico and signed a treaty. And the U.S. taking this territory ended the trade route, but the route became used instead for getting to the California gold rush that soon followed. Further exploration followed after this area became property of the U.S. In 1853, Captain John Gunnison explored the area for possible railroad routes. It didn't work out so well for him. He was killed by Paiutes. But eventually the railroad came anyway. Plus surveyors who named a lot of the features with the names they're known by now. Within this part of the Rockies where the trail is also the Colorado Mineral Belt. It runs from northeast to southwest, and it's about 50 miles wide, and it goes for about 300 miles. In 1858, there was gold discovered in the area. Eventually, 25 million troy ounces of gold was extracted. And then in the 1870s, there was silver found. A lot of the towns that I went to and that the trail goes through or near are towns that were originally mining towns, like Breckenridge, Leadville, Creede, Lake City, and Silverton. There's lots of evidence of mining on the trail. There's old equipment, mine shafts, cabins, tailings, and modern mining is still happening in some areas. I'm not sure what they're still mining. I think some of it is possibly copper mining. The trail goes through 6 national forests: the Pike, the White River, San Isabel, Gunnison, Rio Grande, and San Juan. And within those national forests, there are several protected wilderness areas. There's the Lost Creek Wilderness, Holy Cross, Mount Massive, Collegiate Peaks, La Garita, and Weymanuchi. The trail itself was originally conceived in the 1970s, so let's talk about how that happened. And to do that, we need to talk about Goody Gaskill. Gudrun Gaskill, known as Goody, is considered the mother of the Colorado Trail. She was the first woman president of the Colorado Mountain Club in 1977. But going back to 1973, there was a trails committee of the Colorado Mountain Club that met, and the idea for a trail was kicked around, and the idea was to have it done by 1976 for Colorado's centennial. And Goody led the effort to draw a detailed route for the trail. But 1976 came and went, and it didn't happen, though Goody kept the idea alive. And she persuaded the U.S. Forest Service to support the idea. She recruited volunteers and led crews to build the trail where it needed to fill in gaps between existing trails and old logging and mining roads. And in 1987, the trail was completed. Then Goody became president of the newly founded Colorado Trail Foundation, which was created to manage and support the trail. She led the organization until 1998, and then continued after that to stay involved until near the end of her life. She passed away in 2016 at almost 90 years old. There are 2 parts of the trail named after Goody Gaskill. There's a bridge over the South Platte River at mile 16 between segments 1 and 2. And there's a bench called Goody's Rest that's 4 miles before the southern terminus of the trail. So if you hike this trail, you truly have Goody Gaskill to thank for it even being there. All right, so there's some background on the trail and the area. The next thing I want to talk about is thru hiking as an activity itself. While this is not one of the Triple Crown hikes, the PCT, the CDT, and the AT, and thus it's not a several-month endeavor, it is pretty much longer than any other hike I've covered on this show, and for most people, it's far beyond what they have room for in their busy lives. More than a month of hiking is pretty tough for most people to pull off. So I want to talk first about how to get the time to do a hike this long, because if you don't figure that part out, the rest is irrelevant because you're not going to do it. So first, if you are not a college student or retired or between jobs, you're going to have to figure out with your employer how to make this work. In general, I'm not a 2 weeks off a year kind of guy. I take quite a bit of vacation time. I use all that I have. So my employer, in some respects, is used to me being gone for significant chunks of time, but not this long. So I had to ask for extra time off. So let's talk about how I did that. So I guess the first step is really to work for an employer who could be understanding of the idea. So who you work for obviously matters. Then the second thing is to really work at that employer for many years and do a very good job so that your experience and skills are valued. Then you can ask for the time off because they'll want you back and they'll want you to not leave the job. And so I went to my employer and I explained that doing a hike like this was something I had wanted to do for a long time, that I really needed a break from work, not having taken a break of this length in decades, and that I had recently gone through some personal losses that also put me in a position where I pretty much needed a reset in my life. So I used all the vacation time I had, plus some leave without pay, and I gave my best estimate of when I would return, but left it open-ended so I could make sure that I could finish the hike. And my employer said yes to my request, and I was able to go. I worked through July 19th, and then I came back on September 9th, which was close to 2 months away from work, and was pretty much spot on with the estimate I had as to when I would get back. And to their credit, and for which I am grateful, my employer not just let me go, but was very supportive of me in doing this and was really interested in how it went for me. And I think some people probably even had a little envy and were hoping to figure out how to do something like that in their life. So I don't know, maybe I started something and others will try out some of their long-held dreams. One thing I would say is that if you're going to leave work for this length of time, Put in the effort to make it easy for everyone you work with. Clear out as much work as you can before you leave and make sure absolutely everything is covered by someone else until you get back. So in addition to squaring this with my employer, I also had to square it with my family. That was a bit easier. My children are grown. My daughter's on her own. My son is in college. So my responsibilities at home are less than what they had once been. And financially, I'm now in a position where some leave without pay wasn't a problem for me. Essentially, I'm at a point in my career and life where my time is far more important than money. And my wife, Andy, was supportive of me fulfilling a dream to do a hike of this distance. She even decided to drive me out to the trail, and we made a vacation of it together. And then after she dropped me off, she went to visit some family and friends in Colorado and New Mexico and had a vacation of her own by herself. So once you've squared it with everyone who matters and you're able to actually do the hike, the next thing is to start training for it. We're going to have a separate episode on how to train for a hike like this. And that will be a special episode I'll try to put between some of the episodes on various hikes. But the short answer as to how I trained for this hike is I did rucking, essentially, which means I put weight in a pack. I use a huge bike chain and some dumbbells and wrapped them in a towel. And I went hiking. Initially, this didn't go so well. I was doing it without trekking poles at the beginning because I was wearing a day pack, and I guess in my mind didn't associate trekking poles with wearing a day pack, and ended up breaking my ankle in March. But eventually I recovered and hiked as much as I could. But the reality is, for a hike of this length, you're going to have to build stamina on the trail. So get yourself in the best shape you can, but don't plan to hit the ground running. You have to take it slow when you start and build your endurance as you go. And you also have to realize it's going to hurt for a while. It's going to be really hard at first, but it does get better. At the beginning, 15 miles a day was absolutely brutal, but eventually it became 17 and a little bit easier, and then it became around 20 and even easier. And by the end, I was hiking more than 20 miles a day, maybe 22, 23 miles a day, and it really didn't seem that hard. But that took a lot of time on the trail for that to happen. All right, so those are some of the things to think about in preparing for a big thru hike. But let's talk about a more fundamental question about what thru hiking is and whether you actually want to do a thru hike. I don't think this is something we've talked too much about on the show, so I think it may be worth it to go through it a bit. First of all, as I've alluded to, it's really hard. It's not for everyone. It's not a weekend backpacking trip. It's not even like a 1-week trip. And it's not like trekking where a van or a porter is carrying your heavy gear. It's more like a job or even a lifestyle while you're out there. You come to feel that you're living on the trail, a true nomad in some respects, which is really cool. During the hike, I thought a lot about what it meant to be thru hiking. And I actually wrote some notes on it in my journal that I was keeping throughout the hike. And so I'm just going to read those notes to you unedited, and you'll hear what I was thinking at the time on the trail about what it means to be a thru hiker. All right, so now I'm reading from the notes. A thru hiker puts on the same clothes every day without any shame. A thru hiker relishes early morning wildlife sightings. Hikes 10 miles before lunch. Feels clean and refreshed after a quick wipe down from a damp micro towel. Relishes meeting other thru hikers but doesn't get too attached. Knows the bad weather is coming. Knows their hands will eventually warm up on the trail. Packs a tent and sleeping bag wet for days on end. Feels highs and lows throughout the day but knows they both won't last. Doesn't care if they are hiking up or down or flat. Their tent is truly home. Tapes their feet over and over. Relishes getting to town, but then just as quickly, can't wait to get back on the trail. Feels like a hiking machine, and then feels like they can't go another step. Is always sore somewhere, but doesn't get too attached because it won't last. Loves trail angels. Believes in trail magic. Thinks 50 miles to go means you're almost there. Has something in common with all thru hikers of any age, gender, or ethnicity. Hikes their own hike most of the time, but can also succumb to social pressure to put in more miles. Thinks 10 to 12 miles is a partial day. Ignores mosquitoes and doesn't use DEET or soap or much sunblock. Thinks 3,000 feet of gain and descent is a moderate day. 5,000 is a lot. Hitchhikes and asks for rides without hesitation. All right, well, those are some of the notes I wrote on the trail while I was thinking about what it meant to be a thru hiker. That's the unedited version. I guess I could have cleaned that up a bit, but you get the idea. What it means to be a thru hiker is something I also learned more about from other hikers I met. One of those hikers is Jesse from Boulder, Colorado, aka Easy. I love Jesse's hiking style. He hikes a faster pace than I do, but he likes to spend lots of time relaxing with his shoes off on passes. I'd often catch up to him and find him enjoying the afternoon as I was huffing and puffing to get there. Here's a little audio from Jesse. So Jesse, how'd you end up out here on the Colorado Trail? Like, what inspired you to go do this?
Well, I did the PCT last year. Yeah. I always wanted to do that since I was preteen, probably, I want to say 12 or 13. I first heard about it, and the idea of walking across the country was incredible to me.
How did that go for you? Like, did you do that and feel like, oh, wait, I can do this. This is like something that I like doing and I actually can do it. And now I'm going to go try to do one in my home state of Colorado.
Yeah, once I did that, I kind of got the bug, and I didn't really know about the Colorado Trail.
Okay.
And it got to be 1 year later, and I was like, yeah, I kind of want to live outside in the woods again for a while. And this was the easiest way to do it. No permits, no hassle, just get on the trail and go.
And so now we're about halfway through. What do you think so far?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's fantastic. A lot of places I've heard of since I grew up in Colorado. A lot of places I've heard of, never been to, never seen, just seen pictures. And walking through it is just amazing. It's like a way to learn about where I come from more than I would have otherwise.
What do you think you get out of doing these kinds of hikes, like these long, long hikes?
For me, it's a lot about changing my perspective about life and what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. When you're on the trail long enough, it's no longer a novelty. It's kind of like the life you're living for that period of time. And it kind of changes the way you think about things, the way that time moves for you, the way that the priorities of day-to-day life. Yeah, it's an interesting way to change perspective, I think. Another hiker I met and spent a lot of time hiking with is Steve from New Hampshire. Steve and I talked about the realities of being on the trail for a significant period of time. We reflected on the routines of long-distance hiking, but also the rewards. Let's listen to one of my conversations with Steve. So you're almost done with this thing, like 250 miles?
Yeah, I only get to section hike and I'm done at 250. And so I've got, I don't know, a few more days or so, I think. Something like that.
So what do you think? I mean, what did you expect coming into this? And what do you think now that you've almost finished it? How does it compare to what you were anticipating?
I really didn't know what to anticipate. I thought I'd have a lot more solitude, a lot more downtime, but the reality is...
So you got stuck with Mick and Jeremy.
I got stuck with Mick and Jeremy, who go 5,000 miles a day. No, I'm just kidding. No, I know, I'm just kidding. But like, I thought I'd have more like a solitude thing, but I don't think, like, there's a lot of planning and logistics. Like, you're constantly thinking about where I need to get here, where I need to get there. It's not like it's stressful, but it's not like you're also just like totally chill. You have to actually focus to be in the moment and not get sucked up into thoughts where you're watching all this grandeur go by, and then all you're doing is the tourist take a picture and move on thing. And so it's been cool because I've figured out that I've had to be more mindful to make the moment last. So that's something I learned.
That's a good point. And it's a fair one, that like, you think you're going to be out there and you're going to see all this beauty and it's going to be all about that. And then pretty soon you're like, all you're thinking about is like, where do we need to camp so tomorrow we can get over that pass and not get caught in a rainstorm? Yep. And all those kinds of logistics starts to come in, and that sort of ideal that you have, kind of like, it'll still happen from time to time while you're walking or when you're in your tent thinking by yourself. But It isn't the predominant part of the day, right?
Yeah, correct. It's not the predominant part of the day, and I think you have to like really pay attention to make sure that it doesn't get lost, and you're whiling away through this crazy, beautiful countryside. Now, when you get like to Lake Ann Pass where we were today, that's just awe-inspiring. Like everybody's jaw just dropped. Like it's like that's one of those things where it doesn't matter if you're preoccupied. When you see that, you're like, holy bleep.
We were above the clouds. Like that was literally above the clouds.
Yeah.
That was fantastic.
That was just one of those things where it's like, that makes it all worthwhile. Those moments, even if there's a fair amount of logistics and drudgery, those kinds of things, you're like, wow.
What do you think about the day-to-day routine of making camp, breaking camp, all of that, meals? Like right now you're filtering water as we're talking.
Correct.
Like how does that strike you? Like the day routine over and over of all these things you got to do just to keep it going.
I kind of like it because it's simple. Like our normal lives back in our communities and our jobs and everything else are a lot more complex. And so it's actually kind of a nice simplicity. It is repetitive, but I'm kind of into it now. I'm into a groove. If anything, one of the reasons why I don't want to quit is because I feel like I'm finally getting my trail legs. I'm finally getting my system down. So it doesn't bug me. I think that's kind of what I like about having, a house on your back, like, just being very efficient, and it doesn't take up a ton of your day. And like yesterday, it rained in the afternoon and I was at an alpine lake above tree line, and it was just cool to be in that tent and be completely self-sufficient and be able to make meals, filter water, do everything while it's raining and the wind is blowing. And it's just super peaceful and super cool to be. You might as well cut it off because I can't even think about the next word, but it's like, just to be completely self-sufficient and self-contained.
I know what you're saying. And sometimes I even feel like surprised that everything works.
Yeah.
I'm like surprised sometimes that the tent doesn't collapse when it's a storm, or that, like that everything is just, that everything is fine. And that it's actually not that hard to do all this.
And then I got up this morning, looked out at like 4 a.m. and it's like, okay, the clouds are breaking. I see stars. And then get up at 5 a.m. and we're on the trail going up Lake Ann Pass. And you're just like, this is just cooler than heck. I mean, to be able to do that and then see what we saw at the top of that's just phenomenal.
Okay, last two questions.
Okay.
One is, what do you think of the day-to-day grind of doing all these miles? How does that strike you?
I kind of like it in a sick way. I've always gravitated toward things like, backcountry, cross-country skiing. And I've done so much in the Rockies, like, backcountry skiing or climbing 14ers and stuff. You have to like to earn your turns is the best way I can think of it. That there's, I don't know, it's kind of like its own Zen thing, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
It's freaking hard and it hurts and you want to quit. But there's just something about me that's always liked sports or activities that are like that. It's very grounding. It kind of tends to make all the BS float away, even if every thought is basically like, ow, my foot hurts, ow, my knee hurts, ow, that hurts, or are we there yet? It does kind of just simplify life down to its essentials.
Last question.
Okay.
Are you going to come back and finish this trail?
Oh, hell point? Yeah. No, I'll be back. It's not going to be next year because I got too many killer vacations, but I will most definitely finish this trail. I'll do the east side of the collegiates and then go all the way down to Durango. Absolutely.
As you may have guessed from hearing from Jesse and Steve, one of the things that was really important to me on this hike was the community on the trail. I showed up alone, but I didn't end up alone. I met people from all over, from California, Colorado, Texas, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Missouri, West Virginia, Florida, North Carolina, just to name a few states, but also England, Mexico, Japan, and Canada. I met people of all ages hiking this, all walks of life, white collar, blue collar, students, retirees. And there were not just thru hikers. There were also backpackers and mountain bikers. A bit about mountain bikers for a moment. There was some good and bad in that. Most mountain bikers that I met were fantastic. And in particular, the bike packers, the ones that were out using their mountain bikes as a way to get from campsite to campsite. I'd say the mountain bikers just out for a ride for the day, definitely had a different mojo than the bike packers or the thru hikers. But they were also great people. I think the biggest issue I had with mountain bikes is that they dig sort of a rut in a lot of the trails, which creates a sort of uneven surface on both sides of the trail that make it a little bit difficult to walk on. Also, because a lot of this trail, not the entire trail, but a big portion of this trail allows mountain bikes, the trail design in some places actually favors mountain bikers to hikers. It sort of goes in these short curves that have berms kind of rising on the side to allow a mountain biker to make the turn, which isn't ideal for a hiker. So there is some of the trail design in places that does favor mountain bikers. Another group that's out there is horsepackers. To be honest, though, I only saw one group of horsepackers, 2 women who were riding together. They had horses to ride, and then they had 2 additional horses to pack all their equipment. But I only saw them for a few days because I essentially caught them and passed them. They were only doing about 10 miles a day and were spending shorter days on the trail than the thru hikers were. So horsepacking is a way to see this trail as well, though it may be a more complex way to do it and a bit slower. There's also quite a few section hikers, people out doing the trail in sections over multiple years, and also just backpackers using part of the trail for whatever purpose. In particular, there's the middle section called the Collegiate Peaks, where you can go west or you can go east as a thru hiker, and there were quite a few people who were hiking it as a loop. And I think it's about a 160-mile loop if you do the Collegiate Loop. So that is another group of hikers that I saw. And then, of course, there are day hikers as well. But as far as thru hikers go, it's quite a community. I think of it as sort of hiking together apart, if that makes sense. You hike alone a lot of the day, but you might camp with the same hikers multiple days in a row. And then maybe either you or they is going a faster or slower pace or stops in a town for an extra day, and then you lose track of them. But in general, people are very supportive of each other out there on the trail hiking as a thru hiking community. On the first day of the trail, I met Mick from England. He couldn't remember my name the first day, and for 3 days I thought his name was Nick rather than Mick. But once we squared all that away, we started to become friends as we hiked. We hiked a similar pace and covered about the same distance per day. And from the start, we ended up camping together. And after a week or 2 of leapfrogging on the trail and camping together most of the time, we realized that we were essentially hiking the trail together. And by then, Steve from New Hampshire had joined us. Until about the halfway point in the hike, we were pretty much a loose trail family, with Eric from Denver at the outset as well, and special appearances from Jesse from Boulder. Eric left the trail at Breckenridge. Steve left at Monarch Pass and Salida. And eventually we couldn't keep Jesse's pace, and that left Mick and I hiking together the rest of the way. So even though I went out there alone and spent most of each day hiking alone, I was never really alone and really appreciated the companionship of the other hikers I met. And hiking with Mick was particularly great. It was a real treat for me to hike with someone visiting the United States and the American West for the first time. And it allowed me to see with fresh eyes a lot of the things I might have taken for granted. Here's a clip of Mick on only the 3rd day of the hike. You'll be able to hear his real enthusiasm for what he is seeing on the trail. So Mick, you're here for the first time in the United States. What are your first impressions of the US and of the Colorado Trail after a few days?
Incredible. The wildlife, how lucky was I seeing a bear in the first 2 miles of the trail. Deer, chipmunks, everything may seem normal to you, but to me, it's absolutely beautiful.
It's been fun to see you excited about things like a hummingbird, which is something that still is fascinating, but we see them a lot. Yeah. What do you think of seeing something like that?
I've never seen a hummingbird before, and I'm absolutely speechless. Right up to me. All the wildlife, to be honest. It's not just the hummingbirds, everything, and the trees, the space you've got. It's the walking over here is beautiful.
What do you think of the trail so far?
The trail has been surprising. I mean, it's one path. I've hardly needed a map yet. You just follow the path, and it's such pleasant walking.
We're on our 3rd day.
We are.
And do you have confidence now after doing 2.5 days that you can do this?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do. I think at first I was a bit jet lagged and tired, but I'm beginning to calm down now and sink into the pace of the trail, which is great.
Any final thoughts as we finish lunch here by a creek before we get going again? I think we have a big uphill at the end of this day. So.
Yes, no, just trying not to think of the uphill at the end of this section. But no, thoroughly enjoying, really nice day today, and just enjoying the trees and the wildlife. Wonderful.
In addition to the community I met on the trail, there's also an amazing community supporting the trail. Trail angels and trail magic are real, I've learned. For example, at a road junction a couple of times, April, aka Ninja, left us sparkling waters, and she left us peaches one time. She had hiked the trail earlier in the summer and was out going to road junctions where the trail was pretty dry and leaving liquids for hikers. One time there were day hikers that left cans of beer in the middle of the trail. One day Mick and I came across a pile of fresh cherries on the ground with a note saying that they were trekker treats. If you're wondering, of course we ate them. And there were wild raspberries that made an amazing natural treat for big sections of the hike. Another part of the off-trail community is giving rides to hikers that need to get from the trailhead into towns and back. I had never successfully hitchhiked in my entire life. I had tried once before unsuccessfully, but that's another story. But pretty quickly, getting rides became easy on this trail. Trailhead parking lots are the easiest place because other hikers and mountain bikers understand why you're there. So I'd often ask for a ride as soon as I saw somebody in the parking lot. Getting rides back from towns is not too bad either because locals know why you're there and are happy to help out. These are small towns and people are really generous. When I get to the specific parts of the trail, I'll say more about where you need rides and how to get them. But I do want to give a special shout out to Tisha McCombs. Tisha is now the former executive director of the Colorado Trail Foundation. She ended up giving us rides 3 separate times, and this was just before she left her job at the Colorado Trail Foundation and went off to Spain to hike the Camino de Santiago, which she's now done. And she's going to be traveling for several months before she goes to Peru in the Peace Corps. So thanks to Tisha for all her help, and I'm sure she's having a great time traveling, and I wish her the best of luck in Peru. So getting to towns is important, and the off-trail community supports you to do that. Trail towns and how I thought about them is a phenomenon that developed over the hike. When you get to a junction where you're going to go into town, you are ready for going to town. You feel like you need to get into town. You're tired, you're dirty, you're hungry. But as soon as you're in town for even a night, you're ready to get back on the trail. So it's an odd sensation to be really wanting to get to town and then pretty quickly wanting to leave. There are plenty of hostels, hotels, and motels to accommodate hikers. There's plenty of hiker-friendly restaurants. There's grocery stores that have what hikers want and need. And there's also people willing to even put you up in accommodations, which was amazing. So you can actually stay with strangers. On 2 occasions, we were offered rooms in people's homes. Mick stayed with someone for 2 nights in Breckenridge, with Kent and Chris, I believe were their names. And Mick and I stayed together with the wonderful couple, Emmy and Jim, in Durango, in their beautiful home at the end of our hike. In addition to having a place to stay, they cooked us dinner, let us do laundry. They even let us borrow their car. And they were actually going out of town for the weekend, and we needed an extra night or 2 to get our acts together and get flights home. And they let us stay in their home while they weren't even there. So thanks again to Emmy and Jim in Durango. They were incredibly generous, and I really enjoyed getting to know them. So that's a bit about the communities on and off the trail that support the trail. But I guess another thing to step back and think about, and this is something we talk about in every episode, is why do this hike? So there's a few reasons that come to mind for me if you haven't heard enough already that interest you. One is that it's big enough to give you the full thru hiker experience. Like I've talked about, having a trail family, trail angels, 0 days in town, all the stuff you hear about from the PCT and AT hikers. You can even use a trail name if you want. I hiked with Stop and Go, Black Squatch, Ranger Danger, and Red, aka La Reina de la Distancia, among others. But here's the kicker. Even though it's long enough to be a real thru hike experience, it's a reasonable enough of a time commitment that you don't necessarily have to quit your job or be in between jobs to do it. That said, section hiking is okay if you don't have the time for the full hike, like with Steve, where he hiked half the trail, and we'll come back to hike the other half later. My favorite story, though, about a way to be able to go hike this trail is from Mick. So Mick is a civil engineer and works in his native England. And he was working for a government agency inspecting bridges. When he asked for time to go do this hike, they told him no. And so he decided to retire and go anyway, which I think is fantastic to have the moxie to do that. So there are definitely retired people out there hiking, although Mick's story, I think, was the only one I heard where somebody actually retired to do the hike. There's also hikers out there that are between jobs. There was Billy from Georgia, who now lives in Manhattan, who works in finance, who had the time between 2 finance jobs to go do the hike. There's also Eric, a section hiker from Denver, who wasn't even sure how long he would stay on the trail, and he was between jobs, but left the trail eventually to pursue a job opportunity that came up while he was out hiking. During the hike, I sat down one night and talked with Eric a bit about a food concoction he was putting together and about what brought him out to the trail.
Eric from Denver, what are you eating right now?
I am eating a mango and coconut freeze-dried stew tea soup that I make.
Okay, so tell us about that. Like, it's just mango, coconut, and water, or is there more to it?
That's it. That's all that's in it.
Freeze-dried mango?
Freeze-dried mango, freeze-dried coconut. Actually got it at Target,
okay,
of all places, so you don't have to spend a whole lot of money at fancy camping stores and to get the food you necessarily need. Has all the nutrients, antioxidants in it. And every time I can get hydration, I try and make sure that I'm including hydration in what I'm eating.
So you told me that this is the first time you've done a big, long distance hike like this. What inspired you to get out here and do this? I know part of it was an employment situation where you had to
totally open on that side to it. So I was, caught up in a reduction in force. So I've got time to do it. Luckily in a financial position that I was able to make the time to be able to do it. For me, something like this, I know one of the big struggles with doing a trip like this, it can be very overwhelming to try and plan it all. Have all the right equipment, all timed out right to be able to do it really well. The position I'm in now is I'm not, I think in some other interviews you just had, you're on day 7 or so. I'm on day 9. So I'm moving at my own pace. I'm changing as I need to. I just make sure I've got enough food and water. Cool. So that was one, is just the accessibility for me to go do a trip like this and be able to take as much time as I want to take to make it happen. Another is just, as we were talking about earlier before dinner, is that for me, hiking had always been a part of something to do something else, whether that was hunting or whether that was getting to a lake to fly fish or whether that was, the hiking itself was not about the hiking.
This trip, that's what it is.
And that's what it is in this trip for me, and what I'm trying to make it more about. So being able to take the time and to be able to do that and just to make the trip, and the people that you meet and the experiences that you have in the motion of going through it is really kind of why I did it.
In addition to this being sort of the biggest hike you can get away with without changing your life entirely, there's also the obvious reasons. This is a stunning landscape. It's worth seeing, and that to me is a good enough reason to go do it. It's also a hard hike, really hard, which I think is a good thing. Doing something really hard is rewarding. It's type 2 fun, as they say. So those are some reasons I can think of to do it. There's probably a lot more. Let's talk about logistics to think about in advance of doing the hike. For time of year, this is a summer hike, but one of the things to try to figure out is how to deal with the summer monsoon season. In Colorado, it rains in the afternoon most days for the first half of the summer, or at least that's what I was led to believe. I thought July meant afternoon thunder showers and August was dry. I chose August in part to reduce the likelihood of bad weather, but that was a plan that utterly failed. It rained a lot. If you go a different year or month, your mileage may vary. And it didn't just rain in the afternoon. It rained at night. It rained in the morning. It was pretty much unpredictable, which was not what I was expecting, and maybe isn't typical. So as far as weather goes, you have to prepare for rain, hail, heat, cold, dry stretches, and again, not just afternoon thunder showers. Because so much of the trail is above tree line, you have to make decisions based on the weather. That can mean hiking faster to cross a pass before weather worsens. It can mean stopping early when rain intensifies or turns to hail. Which are you going to do? Are you going to stop or are you going to go? I don't know. What kind of thunder was it? Where's the lightning? Which way is the wind blowing? What are the other hikers deciding to do? What are the camping options ahead? All of these things can go into your decisions around the weather. One surprise to me is it wasn't as cold as I expected, and that's probably because we got so much rain. You have to decide whether to go southbound or northbound. You can go either way, but most people go southbound. That's what I did from Denver to Durango. I think the main reasons to do a southbound through hike on the Colorado Trail is to build elevation as you go. You start out low and generally end up in the higher country as you go. Also, it builds beauty. I felt like the beauty just got better and better as I went. I think going in that direction really pays off. Also, going against the grain, going northbound, means that you will cross paths with way more hikers than if you're going the other direction. And here's what I mean by that. When you're going southbound, even though most hikers are going that direction, you don't see them really because you're all at a different pace and you're spread out. But when you're going the other direction, you see all of them. I talked to one northbound hiker who said that he was seeing 15 to 20 southbound hikers a day. I wasn't seeing anywhere near that in northbound hikers, maybe just one or two at most, and a couple of section hikers. So I would see very few people going the other direction and not many people going my direction because we're spread out. So even though I'm going the predominant direction, during the hiking day, I had a lot of solitude. And going the other direction, I would have seen many more hikers. Let's talk about gear for this hike. There are some considerations that I would take into account. First, in general, lightweight gear is essential for this distance. I'm not saying you need to be ultralight, you don't. But in general, you want to carry the lightest gear that does the job. For a shelter, you definitely want a lightweight tent. A DCF or Dyneema Cuban fiber or composite fiber tent can be great, or a Sil nylon tent. I used a Z-Pax duplex. Mine is a pretty old and falling apart tent, which did become a problem when it rained all night on a couple of occasions. The tent has delaminated over the years and it's not in the best shape, and I had some leakage that I'm going to have to address, and I think that just means I'm going to have to get a new tent. But in general, the duplex is a great tent for these hikes, and a lot of people had them. The Durston tent was popular. There were lots of pyramid-style single-wall shelters. There were some traditional lightweight solo tents as well. But in general, the lightest tent that you're comfortable bringing is what you should bring. A single wall tent works fine. There is condensation when it rains a lot, but I think it's still manageable on that front. I'm not going to go more into tents, but the idea being get the lightest tent you're comfortable bringing. For me, that meant a 21-ounce single wall tent. For a pack, I would have at least a 60-liter pack unless you have a completely ultralight setup. There were some ultralighters with 40-liter packs, but they're really playing a different game, doing much bigger mileage per day, so not having to carry as much food. But I think for most hikers, 60 liters or more is probably what you need. I used a 70-liter pack because Z-Pax makes a great pack that really isn't any heavier than their 60-liter pack, so why not have the extra room? And it allowed me to fit everything inside the pack where other people were strapping things on the outsides of their packs. And it also worked well with my food storage strategy, which I'll describe in a moment. So the Z-Pax R-Call is the pack I have and that a lot of people were using. It was definitely one of the more common packs I saw out there, though I saw different sizes. The key point is your pack needs to be light and support significant loads after resupplies. By the time you might do the trail, it might be a different pack that's popular than the Z-Pax R-Call, but the principle will be the same. So let me circle back to food storage. Ursacks predominate, and those are the sort of bulletproof material, soft-sided bags made to protect your food from bears. In the past, I've had a bear destroy my food inside an Ursack, even though they couldn't open the Ursack. And so I'm always wary of only relying on an Ursack for my food. So the decision that you have to make is whether to bring a bear can or not. I can say most people out there did not have a bear can. Some did, and I did. I actually took a bear can and an Ursack, and I'll tell you why. I have about 4 days capacity of food in my bear can. Maybe I could do a little more than that, but honestly, 4 days is about the most I can fit in there. And there were carries of up to 7 days, up to 100 miles on this hike. So I bring the Ursack as an overflow capacity bag. But if I were to do this hike again, I would probably only take an Ursack, though I would take a much bigger one. I would get the biggest size and just take that. The system I use is one I've used on long carry hikes in the Sierra, and it's worked for me. But the reality is, on the Colorado Trail, there just aren't that many bears. I saw a bear on the first day, and that was it. I don't even think I saw a bear scat for another 300 to 400 miles. So most of the trail, you're up pretty high where bears really have no reason to be, and it's not an issue. The reason I was worried, though, is, as I said, if a bear gets into your ursack and starts smashing all your food and your food is now useless, then you're kind of in a tough position. But what I realized is there are actually more exit points, more access points to the trail through dirt roads or sometimes highways than I had expected. And as a result, if that had happened, I could have gotten off the trail, dealt with the situation, and got back on the trail at another time, easier than I thought I could have. So as a result, if I did this again, I would do it with just an ursack. Though for me, I like having the bear can. I feel safe. I never have to worry about the food situation. And I can use it as a stool and a chair in camp where that convenience is needed. And so for me, it was fine to have a barricade, which is a very light bear can that I've had for a long time, and using a system that I was familiar with using. Let me talk about water for a second. There are some long waterless stretches on this hike where you sometimes need to carry water for up to 15 to 20 miles. So you need to have at least 3 liters of capacity. There were times when I carried more than that as I was getting close to camp and there was water and I was going to dry camp. There are times where you have to dry camp, or maybe where you won't have to, but where it will be much more convenient to. And so you definitely want to have additional capacity. I had 2 1-liter smart water bottles. I had a 1-liter bottle on my filter, and I also had a 3-liter large fill bottle, soft-sided container. So essentially, I had up to 6 liters of capacity. I never needed to use that much, but I did have it. For stoves and fuel, I would use a lightweight canister stove. You can get easily 2 weeks out of the bigger, medium-sized canisters. You may not believe it, but it's absolutely true. And that's even with boiling water every morning and every evening. Really, you can get a full 2 weeks out of those canisters. The bigger ones, not the really gigantic tall ones, but the normal bigger ones. I think they're something like 220 grams. Those, when they're full, can serve you quite a long time. And you may only need 2 of those for the entire hike, plus maybe 1 smaller canister. There's really no need to use alcohol stoves. One thing I brought that I don't normally bring on other hikes is I brought clothing for town. I normally bring camp sandals, so those are something I already have, so I didn't have to wear my smelly hiking shoes in town. But I also brought a very lightweight t-shirt, a second pair of underwear, and a very lightweight pair of running shorts, so that when I got to town and had to do my laundry and wanted to walk around town, I didn't have to wear my rain gear or something like that. I could just wear a fresh set of clothes. And that to me was a really wonderful thing to have. I think the total of the clothing was only 10.5 ounces in weight, and it really made me comfortable every time we got to a town. Speaking of towns, let's talk about resupplies. So my strategy involved 2 things. One was using the outdoor herbivore resupply service, and the other was buying food in towns at grocery stores. As you may have heard on prior episodes, I eat a vegan diet, so getting meals shipped to me was much more convenient for me than buying locally. So here's how it worked using Outdoor Herbivore's resupply service. Essentially, all I did was go on their website on my mobile phone and order what I wanted to pick up in the next shipment. I entered several addresses that I had looked up for possible resupply points on my account on Outdoor Herbivore's website while I was still at home. That just made them easy to call up later while I was on the trail. But I also had to add some addresses as I went when things evolved and I had different places to pick things up than I had anticipated. So each time I picked up a resupply, I would typically be in a town or in a place where there's Wi-Fi, and therefore I could get online and order the next shipment that I could pick up a week from then, roughly. I didn't order everything in advance. I only ordered the next shipment. And the reason I did that is I might want different quantities of food, or I might want different meals than I expected or had planned to eat. I might just have gotten sick of a particular meal and didn't want to eat it anymore, or wanted more of something different. I just wanted to have the flexibility to order what I was ready to eat. And so each week, essentially, I would order for the next week. The meals always arrived on time. If I had extra meals from before, there's hiker boxes in most of the towns at the stores or at other locations where you can leave extra food for future hikers coming through who might want it. And hikers that I met actually grabbed some of those meals and told me they really enjoyed the Outdoor Herbivore meals. As I mentioned, it's not hard to get into town. There are parking lots at the trailheads where you can usually find a ride. It requires some patience at highways, but it's still pretty easy. In town, it's even easier to arrange rides back to the trail, particularly if you want to be on the trail early. It's good to arrange them in advance. For example, in Lake City, there was a guy who was spending the summer at the RV park who was willing to do morning drives to take hikers back up to the trail. There's also a shuttle from a church in Lake City that did once-a-day runs up to the trail and back. So depending on when you wanted to go back to the trail, you could arrange a ride. Another part of my resupply strategy was to resupply as close as possible to the trail itself, even if that's not where I was going to spend time in town. That way, I wasn't required to go into town if for some reason I didn't want to. So for example, at Monarch Pass, there's the Monarch Summit Souvenir Shop, I think it's called, and I had my shipment sent there, which is literally right on the trail. So if I didn't want to go into Salida, I could simply pick up my next shipment, buy a few extra snacks, and keep going. I ultimately did want to go into Salida and really enjoyed my time in Salida, but I didn't know before I got there whether I would want to do that. And so it was most convenient to have my food shipped directly to that shop that's right on the trail, just so I had the option to not go into a particular town. And there were other places where you could do a similar thing. For example, sending a resupply to Twin Lakes makes sense because it's right on the trail, essentially, even if you want to go into Leadville or somewhere else from there to spend an evening. If you have problems with gear and need repairs or resupply, those are things you can do in town as well. Most towns had an outdoor store or a fishing or hunting store that had gear that would be helpful to you. For example, I went to a fishing and hunting store in Lake City and bought a new water filter when mine had gotten clogged to the point that it wasn't useful. And also I bought new hiking socks because I kept wearing holes through the bottom of the ones I had brought, and I had to throw those away and get new hiking socks, which was not hard to do going to an outdoor store or a hunting or fishing store. And I even broke a tip off one of my trekking poles and was able to get it repaired at the outdoor store in Salida. So repairing or replacing gear is something that may come up, and there are ways to do that. All right, let me talk about navigation. Navigation has changed, and for a big trail like this, the easiest way to do it is to get the Far Out app and download for $25, I think it is, the Colorado Trail package on Far Out. This app is incredible. It was by far what I used the most for navigation, and so did every single other thru hiker out there. The app allows you to essentially see exactly where you are on the trail. It has upcoming water sources, campsites. It has comments by users, so you can see if a water source is still flowing as of a few days ago when the last person who entered a comment put it in there. So I highly recommend getting the Far Out app and buying the Colorado Trail download for that app. The other key thing to have is the Colorado Trail data book, which essentially has a written form of a lot of that same information I just described. So it has water sources, it has possible campsites, it has key trail features. It's all listed in an easy to follow and understand format and allows you to plan your days without having to scroll through the app or use up power on your phone. To add to that, I should just mention having a power bank, an extra battery pack for your charging is also essential. There are pretty lightweight ones you can get these days. I know that sounds like something you shouldn't have to bring on a hike like this, but it's absolutely essential these days, particularly if you also use a GPS device like I do, a Garmin InReach. There's pretty good trail signage throughout the hike. When you get into designated wilderness areas, the trail signage is less often because they don't allow the signage on the trees themselves in wilderness areas. But in general, the trail signage throughout the hike is pretty good, and it's not that hard to figure out which way to go when you get to junctions. I did bring maps as well. You can get map packets from National Geographic. There's the southern half and northern half of the trail, and then there's also one for the collegiate loop. I brought them and then disposed of them once I passed the section that they covered. But honestly, I didn't really ever use them. I guess I wouldn't want to be on the trail without paper maps, but they're really a backup for the app and the data book. One thing I did is I shipped ahead to Twin Lakes a lot of stuff that I thought I might need in the middle of the hike, and so I only had to carry one of those map packets until Twin Lakes, and then I could dispose of the first one and replace it with the new ones. All right, getting to the trailhead. Obviously, you need to get to Denver. My wife, Andy, drove me from California to Denver. Most people will probably fly to Denver. You can take light rail from Denver that goes pretty close to the trailhead and then take an Uber the last length of the way to get to Waterton Canyon Park where the hike starts. There are no permits needed whatsoever for this hike. So you essentially just get on the trail and go, as I think Jesse said. The trail is either 486 or 491 miles, so roughly 800 kilometers. Whether it's 486 or 491 or slightly different depends on whether you do the collegiate loop west or east, and we'll talk about that in a moment. There's about 90,000 feet of gain and loss. Typical days can easily have 4,000 feet of gain and loss, and sometimes more. I mentioned this a little before, but pacing is important. It took me longer than I thought it would to get my trail legs. I thought I would be essentially at full speed after a few days. It took more like 2 to 2.5 weeks to really feel competent and strong as a hiker. As I mentioned, my mileage each day started getting longer as I got more and more acclimatized and conditioned on the trail. That said, 0 days and 0 days are important. So there were 3 times where I took an entire day off, meaning spending 2 nights in a town to have a day of not hiking. There were several other times where I took an afternoon off and then maybe the next morning off with 1 night in a town. And so those kinds of days, whether it's a 0-mile hiking day or a near 0-mile hiking day, can be really, really important to recovery. Let's talk about the itinerary. If you're someone that loves this part of the show, then here we go. If you're someone that isn't into the details of the hike, I think you'll still enjoy this because I've included some audio from me on the trail. And after the trail details, there's audio of Mick and me only 3 days before the end of the trail, reflecting on our experience, which I think you'll enjoy as well. So there's a lot in here for everybody. I'm not going to go through every day, of course. I'm going to break it into big sections. Let me start by saying there are 28 official segments of the trail. They vary in length from around 11 miles to 32 miles. What that means is they are not supposed to be days. For example, each segment is not supposed to be 1 day on the trail. Rather, the way the official segments of the trail are divided is by access points. And what I mean by that is it's divided so that if you wanted to get on a segment, there's some way to get to that trailhead and get on from the outside world and hike from that point to the end of that segment and then get off the trail. Be aware, though, that the access roads may be really remote. They may be a really low-quality, unmaintained Jeep track, not necessarily a highway. There are paved highways as well, but there's a wide range of quality of these access points, so not everyone's going to be able to get on or off the trail at those points. But in any event, that's how the trail is broken up into the official 28 segments. I break up the trail instead, in my mind, by the resupply points. So I'll talk about the trail in a few sections. Let me just go through them so you know. First, it's Denver to Breckenridge, which also includes a resupply in Jefferson, which I'll get to. And Breckenridge also includes possibly Frisco, which is a different town. Then Breckenridge to Twin Lakes, which includes also options to get to Leadville from a couple of points. Then Twin Lakes to Monarch Pass, which is the pass that allows you to get to Salida. And I think Gunnison on the other side of the pass, though I went to Salida. And then Monarch Pass to Spring Creek Pass, which is the access point to Lake City. I think you can also go to Creed in the other direction, but I went to Lake City. Then Lake City to Silverton, and then Silverton to Durango. All right. So the hike starts at Waterton Canyon just outside of Denver. The first day, I was experiencing rain already. Here's a little audio of me in my tent. I'm still excited to be out there, but already dealing with rain and tough weather. I ended up dry camping near Mick the first day of the hike, and here's some of that audio. Well, here I am, first day of the Colorado Trail. Went 11.7 miles today. Picked up water at Bear Creek at 8.6 miles. And then thought I'd hike 3 more miles to do a dry camp. But as you can hear, it's anything but dry. got a storm coming through and it's raining pretty hard. But luckily I got the tent set up before it got too bad. And so now I'm just chilling out in the tent, riding out the storm, and hoping it'll clear up in the next couple hours so that I can have a relaxing evening. The end of the first section, as I think I mentioned before, you cross the Goody Gaskill Bridge, which goes over the South Platte River. It then goes through a pretty big burn area where there had been a fire many years ago, and it's still pretty sparse without really any shade in that area. Eventually, you get to a fire station where you can refill water because this is also a pretty dry area. The first 2 nights ended up dry camping. But after that, there's some more interesting terrain where it goes through Lost Creek and Lost Park. Lost Park is an amazing meadow that's 6 miles long. And then ultimately, you come to South Park and Kenosha Pass, which is a road that you can get into Jefferson for a resupply from. And yes, it's that South Park. The town of Fairplay, which is in this area, is supposedly the town the TV show was based on. I didn't see Kyle or Cartman or Kenny or any of the other guys when I was there, but it is the same South Park. I would recommend using Jefferson as a resupply, which is at about mile 73, I believe. It's a very easy hitchhike from the parking lot. You can get into Jefferson, which is only 4.5 miles. It's an easy hitchhike back to the trail. And you can get back on the trail and keep going the same day within a couple of hours and get a good lunch and resupply your food. And I picked up a package from Outdoor Herbivore there as well. The reason I think it's worth doing is because it's over 100 miles all the way to Breckenridge. And so if you don't want to carry food for an entire 100-mile stretch, Jefferson gives you an opportunity to break that up, even if you don't stay overnight in that area. There's really nowhere to stay overnight in Jefferson itself, though, as I said, you could go into Fairplay, which is further down the highway. It's about 6 more miles from there to a really great campsite. So I would recommend getting back on the trail and hiking 6 more miles that day. And I think it's at Jefferson Creek, though I could be getting that wrong. There's quite a good campsite. I think the next day you cross the Continental Divide for the first time at Georgia Pass. And that's where you join the Continental Divide Trail, which if you take the Collegiate West route, you stay with for 319 miles before you part ways with it again. Just over 100 miles, maybe mile 104, you get into Breckenridge, which is a fancy, busy ski town. The trail actually comes out a few miles away from Breckenridge, but you can get into Breckenridge by a bus. I actually hitched a ride with a mountain biker. You could also go the other way into Frisco, which is a bigger city and has an REI and things like that if you need it. But Breckenridge is a pretty cool town. Even though it's a very busy, expensive ski town, it does have a full-service grocery store. It has lots of good restaurants. And that was where I took my first complete 0 day. I stayed 2 nights at the Fireside Inn, which is a hotel and hostel that has a range of prices depending on your needs. I think it's a great place. It's very hiker-friendly. It came with a free load of laundry being done included. Maddie, who runs the place, is a wonderful young woman and takes good care of you. So I highly recommend for most thru hikers, if they want to stay in Breckenridge, to consider the Fireside Inn. All right, so that's the first section of the hike. The second section of the hike is Breckenridge to Twin Lakes. First, you have to climb up and over the 10-mile range, which is a beautiful above tree line hike, but also a lot of climbing. It's several thousand feet up to get up over it, and then several thousand back down to the Copper Mountain Ski Resort. Copper Mountain Ski Resort is a great place to stop. There's lots of restaurants very close to the trail. You can get a good meal and then move on and find a campsite after dinner, which is what we did. The next day, you go over some high passes again, Searle Pass and Kokomo Pass. And then ultimately, you'll drop down to Camp Hale, which is an old military base where they trained the 10th Mountain Division, I believe, in World War II to go out to Italy, to invade Italy. And this base is still there. There's not much there except some old cement bunkers, but it's in a beautiful valley, and it's kind of a neat ghost town, if you will, of a military base. At this point in the hike, I was getting pretty frustrated at how much rain we had already had, which I wasn't expecting, as I think I said. And so here's some audio of me in my tent musing about that.
It's day 11, August 5th. It's raining again. It's 5:15 in the afternoon. It's been raining since 1:30 or 2, off and on, but mostly on. We set up camp around 3:30. I'm here camped next to Mick from England, and Steve from New Hampshire is camped a little ways up the trail. We got in about 15 miles before the rain started. It's been going, though, pretty steady for a while now with no sign of letting up.
I believe at around mile 142, there's an option when you cross a highway to go into Leadville from there. And I know some people I met did that, but I kept going all the way to Twin Lakes. You go by the turnoffs to Mount Elbert and Mount Massive, so there's great opportunities there if you want to climb one of those 14ers on the way before you get to Twin Lakes. Twin Lakes doesn't have much for accommodations. It has a general store, and that's at about mile 175, I believe. The general store is a great place to send a package to yourself if there's anything that you don't think you'll be able to find along the way, because it's right on the trail or right off a side trail, essentially, and also has lots of supplies you can buy there at the store. I actually had a package that I'd sent to myself, and I had my outdoor herbivore package both delivered to me at the general store in Twin Lakes. But because we couldn't find any accommodations in Twin Lakes, Mick and Steve and I got a ride into Leadville. This is when we met Tisha McCombs. She gave us all a ride into Leadville, and we stayed in Leadville for a night, which is a wonderful town, neat old mountain town. It's over 10,000 feet in elevation, and definitely, if you haven't been there, really cool place to hang out for a night. If you need to get back from Leadville, look up the phone number or ask somebody how to get in touch with Katie Cat, who runs her own one-woman taxi cab service. I won't say more. She's fantastic. Look up Katie Cat for a ride. So from Twin Lakes to Monarch Pass is the next section. And this is where you have to make a decision about whether you're going to take Collegiate West or Collegiate East. The West is spectacular and steep with amazing views. The East is more in the trees and less exposed. Some people I met decided to take the East route because of bad weather that was coming in, and they thought it would just be less of a problem to be in the trees than to be exposed. For some reason, that never occurred to me. I just wanted to do the spectacular route and went west. One of the things you have to decide at Twin Lakes is how to get to Collegiate West and Collegiate East if you're going to do that. The traditional trail route goes all the way around the lakes, but that just seems like a waste of time because you end up sort of back where you started. There is a trail you can take if you go the opposite direction from the general store that gets you on the west side. We did neither of those things. Mick and Steve and I ended up walking straight across the marsh that connects to the lake. And while it was the shortest way to get to Collegiate West, it had the worst mosquitoes that I've ever seen in my life. And we had to cross a river, and we were stuck in marsh and couldn't find the way part of the time. And so I'm not sure I'd recommend going straight through the marsh on this faint dirt road like we did. But in any event, that's how we ended up finding our way to Collegiate West, which I'll call the swamp and river option. So as I said, Collegiate West is steep and rocky. It's exposed. It's beautiful. You go over Hope Pass, which is really stunning that first day. Then you drop down where you can take a slight detour to go into Winfield, which is an old ghost town of a silver mining town, which I recommend. It's only a short distance off the trail, and it's a neat little ghost town with a few buildings still preserved. After that, you go over Lake Ann Pass, which is another stunning pass. We went over it on a day where we were above the clouds, which was really fantastic. Eventually, you make it to a road at Cottonwood Pass, and then you start climbing up onto the Continental Divide. We got hit with a pretty bad hailstorm there, but that's a beautiful section as well. And then ultimately, you follow the Continental Divide all the way to Monarch Pass, where, as I mentioned, you can get a resupply there from the store there. I believe they charge you $10 to hold a box for you. I had Outdoor Herbivore send me a box there. And then at that point, you can hitch a ride into Salida, which is not very difficult to do. I think you can go the other direction to Gunnison, but I would highly recommend Salida. Salida was my favorite trail town of the entire hike. It has a really laid back feel. It's on the Arkansas River. It's big enough to have real families and community, but also small enough to feel really comfortable. And it's not as expensive as Breckenridge or fancier locations like that. And it's also not as gritty as some of the other towns. Leadville has a little bit of grittiness to it. Silverton as well, which can be a good thing. But Salida just felt like a wonderful town, and I highly recommend checking it out. The next section is Monarch Pass to Spring Creek Pass. We had gotten a ride back up to the trailhead with Tisha. I think it would not be that hard to hitchhike back to the pass as well. The first couple of days past Monarch Pass were kind of rolling hills. This is the Coche Topa Hills. There was infrequent water, so long stretches where you have to carry significant water. This was not my favorite part of the trail, though we did run into April, who, aka Ninja, was her trail name, who brought sparkling waters for us, which was cool. This is on a section that really had some open range, which was really interesting to see. Just really open parts of the trail where you're going up and down rolling hills where you can see for miles and miles. I actually liked that section, and it didn't last very long, so it would have been boring if I'd done it for 4 or 5 days, but just for part of a day, it was really cool. And then after that, there's a really long stretch along the Coche Topa River that is really beautiful. At that point, I ran into a moose, almost quite literally. Let's listen to some audio I recorded while walking this section. Right now I'm walking in a beautiful valley, sagebrush, and then a river to my right with beaver dams. I just walked by a moose. Luckily it was a cow and not a bull, and she let me go past without any problem. But it's absolutely gorgeous. It's been raining for hours. There's a slight let up in the rain. There's been thunder going for the last couple hours over the hills to my right. I don't know what else to say. It feels pretty good to be alive right now. From the Coche Topa River Valley, you climb up to the La Garita Mountains on the shoulder of San Luis Peak. And this is where you start to really enter the San Juan Mountains. At this point, I was climbing steeply to a pass, and I mistakenly thought the weather that was not looking so good wasn't going to hit me, and ultimately it did. Here's some audio of me climbing steeply to one of the biggest passes on the hike. I'm working my way up to 12,800 feet. I'm climbing to I think it's the highest pass so far. I don't know if there might be one higher later. I just left San Luis Pass and segment 20 behind. So I'm left the La Garita Mountains. I'm now going up for the first time into the San Juan Mountains. There's one hiker a ways up ahead of me. I don't know who it is. And then Mick, I'm stopping here for a little breather. Mick is probably a half hour behind me. This is maybe the 4th pass of the day. After I get to the top, I'm going to try to spend a little time. The weather's a little iffy. There's storms off to one side, clouds to the other, and not bad above me. A little bit cloudy, but nothing serious. I don't know, man. The San Juans are pretty incredible so far. I've just got into them today. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of them. Though tomorrow, taking a day off. Tomorrow I'll probably have about 10 or 11 miles to get to a highway and then get into Lake City for a 0 day. The landscape here is incredible. It's almost completely above tree line. It's a mix of high mountains and desert with eroding peaks. It looks like straight out of a Western movie, but much higher elevation than Western movies are made at. All right, I don't know. I've got a few hundred more feet to go to make it to, I think it's the last pass of the day. Then I'm going to head downhill a few miles to a creek where there's supposed to be good camping. I told Mick I'd stop there and set up for the evening, so hopefully he'll catch up eventually. Right now I'm going to finish the climb. And ultimately at the end of that day, it was raining a lot again, and I made it to my tent and settled in for an evening of cooking in the vestibule and waiting out the rain. So today I went over 4 separate passes, I think. Absolutely stunningly beautiful day. It's now 4 o'clock and it's raining really hard. I made it to, I think it's called Middle Mineral Creek in the San Juan Mountains, and got my tent set up while it was pouring. And now I'm soaking wet, but I'm inside my tent feeling cozy. And it's still raining, although there's some sun in the distance, so maybe it'll lighten up soon. Yeah, it was an exhausting day. I think it was over 4,000 feet of climbing and probably a similar amount of descent. Got caught in a hailstorm a couple hours ago. But it's amazing how after all that, even though I'm soaked and all my gear is soaked, I'm pretty happy to be inside my tent and be relatively dry and the rain be falling outside and not on me anymore. Mick was trailing behind a little bit. I hope he'll see my tent and where it's set up so that he can get set up somewhere nearby. He was probably half an hour behind me today. So there you have it. Tomorrow I go into Lake City and hopefully get dried out and washed up and get all my laundry done and have some good meals. After this section, you eventually make it to Snow Mesa, which is a really amazing high altitude mesa that you walk on for hours. But then eventually you drop down to the highway at Spring Creek Pass, where you can get a ride into Lake City. At 12:30 each day, there's a shuttle from I believe it's the Presbyterian Church in Lake City, that has set up sort of a hiker center at the church in the summer. And they send a Chevy Suburban to pick up hikers. They pick everyone up in Lake City and take them up there at 12 and pick up the hikers at the pass at 12:30 and bring them back to Lake City. So I was able to get a ride that way into Lake City. You can have packages sent to the hiker center at the church. My package had arrived at the post office but hadn't been picked up by the church, so I got a ride from a church volunteer to the post office to pick up my package of my next outdoor herbivore resupply. One thing I learned is that just being in town doesn't shelter you entirely from the elements. Even while I was in Lake City, hanging out with Mick, enjoying a day off, we took a full 0 day in Lake City. There was still significant weather that came in. So we're in Lake City on our day off and still getting pelted by thunderstorms and rain and lightning and thunder. It's coming down. I didn't want to try to run across the street. So there you have it. You can have an adventure even in town. So from Spring Creek Pass to Silverton is the next section. This to me was an absolutely stunning section of hiking, just really beautiful, mostly above tree line. Very difficult up and down, lots of passes, but just stunning and worth the effort. We had a night where it rained all night, and that was rough. I ended up with a flooded tent because I had unfortunately camped in a dip, which ended up being a puddle that filled with water. Bad idea. Don't do that. But the next day, I packed up everything soaking wet and hiked down to the train tracks. That's right, to the train tracks. At 11:18 a.m. every day, there's a train that comes through from Durango to Silverton, and it stops if you flag it down at the Elk Park siding, which is really just a log on the side of the train tracks that you can sit on. And when the train comes, you get up and wave your hands, and hopefully they stop for you. And they took us into Silverton on the train, and we didn't have to pay for it. So essentially, I hitchhiked on a train, which was something that was pretty cool to do. Silverton is a very sort of preserved Western mining town. It's really cool, but it does have the feel of being essentially a full town-sized tourist attraction. That said, I enjoyed it. We stayed at the Grand Imperial Hotel, which is an old Western hotel, pretty cool and reasonably priced for what it is. And enjoyed an evening off in Silverton, and then took the train back at 2 p.m. the next day to the Elk Park siding where they dropped us off, and we continued our way on the trail. We ended up paying for a ticket to go back because we were told to get on the train in Silverton, you had to pay and couldn't just ride for free like we had done coming the other direction. But we learned from other hikers we were with that you could get on the train without a ticket, and that the ticket takers would generally not require you to pay because you were only going a half an hour. So, you know, we contributed to the funding to keep the train system going, I guess, and probably didn't need to. In any event, you could probably take the train both directions into Silverton from the trail and back without paying. No problem. So that's what I would recommend doing. And I highly recommend taking the train into town. It's a beautiful train ride, even for that 20 to 30 minutes that you're on it. And a really cool thing to do to be able to say that you hitchhiked on a train. All right. After Silverton is the last section of the trail from Silverton to Durango. This goes through the La Plata Mountains. Again, it's beautiful. It's high elevation, a little bit more red rock than what you've seen before. After you get off the train and hike uphill to a pass, this is an area where you can get a resupply and where I had sent a package. So Outdoor Herbivore had shipped me a package to the Mullis Lake campground. I recommend doing a resupply shipment there because that way, if you don't want to go into Silverton, you don't have to, because it's only about a half mile off the trail to get into the little store at the campground. So that's a pretty good way to get a resupply and leave your options open. And ultimately, the trail finishes in Durango. It's very easy to get a hitch into town at the end of the trail. Durango is a really cool town. It's bigger than most of the other towns on the trail. It is pricier than some of the other towns and has this sort of big city feel. It's big enough to have a Walmart and other things, you know, not in the old part of the town, but around it. So it's a pretty good sized town, but it's also a neat historic town and has a neat downtown with lots of nice restaurants and shops, several outdoor stores, and a nice place to spend a couple nights before you find a flight home. I took a flight from Durango to Denver and then on to San Francisco to get back home. But if you're going further afield, you might consider taking a bus back to Denver or taking a train. There are other options depending on where you're going from there to get from Durango to where you're going. And as I said earlier, Mick and I really enjoyed our stay there with Emmy and Jim in their home. All right. So that's a quick summary of the sections of the trail. I didn't want to do too much there because otherwise it would take hours and hours to go through all of the detail. That's just a taste of it. you should get the Colorado Trail guidebook. You should get the data book. You should get the app, and then you can really work through the details of planning a hike like this through those sources. And there are some great online blogs as well that are not hard to find that give lots of information. Near the end of the hike, Mick and I sat down and talked about our experience. And we reflected on how the hike went for us and what it meant. And I think it's a pretty good summary of the hike. So let's eavesdrop on that conversation, and then I'll come back and give a few of my final thoughts on the hike.
So when we first talked, we were 3 days into this trip, and you were pretty excited about all the stuff you were seeing, all the new things, hummingbirds, things like that, that you had seen a bear. Now you are more than a month into this trip. How are you thinking about it now?
I'm still excited. I've got to be honest. I love the big open meadows, the wildlife, the deer, the elk we've seen, the moose, the big open spaces, camping. I really struggle to put it into words. It's everything I was hoping for, apart from the sore feet.
We've also had a pretty extraordinary summer, I think, as far as weather. Most of the people who live here have been commenting about how much it's rained. And I don't think I expected nearly as much rain as we've gotten. What have you thought about what we've had to put up with as far as the weather?
I think the first week or fortnight, I probably found harder than the rain, because coming from the UK, I'm probably used to camping in the rain, with the exception of last night, where everything was wet, and that was a really trying night.
Yeah.
But I found it harder, I think, to cope with the heat, because that's not something I get.
Yeah, we had a lot of heat in the first week
generally.
or so, or?
Yeah, it was exhausting. Probably coupled with jet lag, to be fair, and the altitude.
Yeah.
But yeah, last night, getting soaked before we could even put the tents up, and then just being wet all night was trying. But to a certain extent, I'm used to that.
What do you think about the community of people out here I see two communities. I see one that's supporting the trail and in the towns, and then also the community of hikers. To me, that's something that I didn't have a good sense of what that would be like, and I'm pretty impressed with it.
Yeah, I'm hugely impressed. Again, I probably watched far too many videos of people on the PCT and people doing different hikes. You certainly have a much better hiking culture here. It's like a subculture. Everybody is so friendly. That's one side, but I've got to say, what I found equally enjoyable is how friendly everybody else has been, how friendly people have been hitching you into town.
Yeah.
We've had rides. You happen to mention to somebody that you've got no mozzie repellent, and next thing you know, they're giving you their mozzie repellent. I've been put up in people's houses.
Yeah.
It's just been incredible. Everybody in the hotels, the shops, everybody is so friendly.
A beer left in the middle of the trail for you?
That was, yeah. And cherries today.
Cherries today, yeah. Cherries left.
How many times would you just pick fruit off the floor and think, my, what a treat?
Yeah. I wasn't, at first when I saw them there, I had this moment where I'm like, should I eat those?
Yeah.
But then...
That's food left on the floor. Do I really want that?
Yeah. But then I said, you know what? Somebody left that there for me.
Yeah. And I've been living on the floor for the past month, so...
Yeah. How about your gear and food and all that? How's that worked out for you compared to what you were anticipating?
Pretty much as I was expecting, really. I'm quite pleased. I seem to have used all my gear. I think I could have trimmed it down. I brought too much, and then with buying clothes here, I've been carrying spare clothes because I'm too tight to throw them out. So I'll take them home. But yeah, the gear's all performed really well. I'm quite pleased.
So we're now possibly 3 days away from finishing this.
We are 3 days away from finishing this.
It could be 4, but you're going to say 3, and I'm confident we can do it in 3. We've got over 50 miles, but the pace we've been going, I think we can do it. And looking at the map, I think it does work.
I think so. It's hard. It's a challenge, but the whole thing's a challenge. You've just got to keep pushing yourself.
So what do you think now? I mean, you're almost at the end of this. How has it been different from your expectations, or exceeded or met or under?
I would say it's been much harder than what I anticipated.
Yeah, me too.
I wasn't
That's what I think.
anticipating
Yeah.
any. I mean, I was coming to walk across the Rockies. What on earth was I thinking? It was always going to be up and down.
Yeah.
But I wasn't expecting it to be as hard as this.
So I found the collegiates to be the hardest part on the up and down. And I don't know if that's because I'm finally used to it now and I'm doing better on the up and down just because my body's adjusted, or if the San Juans are actually easier. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think we're doing more elevation gain on a daily basis now than we were when we were in the collegiates. So I guess we've acclimatized and just pushing beyond what we were doing in the collegiates. I think we were doing sort of 3,000 foot a day on the same sort of distance, maybe a little bit less. Now we're doing 4,000 foot, but 20-mile days.
Yeah.
But it's just as hard. I found my ability to walk uphill, I have to just completely slow down, almost to a shuffle. But I don't stop and I just keep getting there. And that's come as a big surprise how hard I found it.
I mean, the altitude is still the altitude, right? Like even if you're adjusted,
I keep catching my breath, and I don't know if it's me or if it's the altitude. But I'm finding if I lift my arms up to take a picture, I can't do it for very long. I feel ill, and I can only think that's the altitude. So I am glad that we've got the last 12,500 foot pass out of the way.
So besides the trail being maybe even harder than you anticipated, and I agree with that, anything else that came as a complete surprise or unexpected or is different than you imagined?
Mainly there was the fatigue and the amount I'm putting into it. I think in the UK I would probably do longer days, but I tend, because you can't wild camp in the UK, I tend to walk from dawn to dusk. What I found quite pleasant here, once I've got my head around it, is stopping mid-afternoon, 4 or 5 o'clock, putting your tent up and cooking your evening meal and having a bit of a social chat. I found that pleasant, but a little bit, it's taken me some getting used to, because I've continuously wanted to keep going, but I haven't. My legs wouldn't keep going anyway. So I
feel like we've kind of got to a happy medium there, where now we're doing 20-mile days.
Yeah, we're doing,
And so we're doing pretty long days of hiking, and we're starting early, but there's still time in the evening to do what we're doing now, to have a conversation and, like you said, to cook dinner and all of that. So I think it's a kind of good place to end up.
Yeah.
I think 1 or 2 times we may have stopped at like 3 or 2:30, and that may have been because of rain, but it felt like a long afternoon when you're not hiking from like 3 o'clock on.
It did. I also found, I was quite surprised, the 0 days, really enjoyed the town food, really enjoyed the towns, but by the end of the 0 day, you're ready to get back on the trail. I think yesterday or the day before, I'm losing track of time completely now, in Silverton,
yeah,
we only stopped one night, and I found that was more than enough time,
right,
to get our washing done, get our resupply done, have some town food and relax a bit. And I actually find it, I'm more fatigued the day after a 0 day than I was after a Nero.
Yeah, I think it's funny, you sleep better in
I don't sleep in hotels.
You don't sleep well in a hotel room. Yeah.
My tent is my happy place. Yes.
Yeah. Well, no more town days, because the next town is the end of the line.
It is, but I have every intention of enjoying Durango as much as I possibly can. Done the train now, so we don't need to do the train.
That's right.
But
the train was cool.
I just want to experience the town, really, and as much as I can before I have that long flight home. But I will be coming back.
That was my next question. You anticipated it, which is are you planning to come back and explore more of the United States?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as you know, because we've talked about it, I have a dream of doing the PCT, but whether mentally I could cope with 5 months on trail, I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to come round to the fact that it might be a question of doing it in section hikes. Do the desert section, then the Sierras, and then possibly the rest of it later on. The other trails that I'm looking at, I mean, I'd love to do something in the Wind River Range.
Oh, right, the Wind Rivers. And you'd also mention the Arizona
and
Trail.
The Arizona Trail is another one that I've heard is really good. I did find this trail, the sections where we had no water, particularly challenging, especially when it was hot. I mean, I guess everybody does, but that was quite tough, and it makes me think, I wonder how much I would enjoy the Arizona Trail if you're walking for long days and continuously thirsty and looking for fluid.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Mick. Well, this has been quite an adventure for both of us, I think. I didn't know what I was going to find out here, and I definitely agree with you that it was harder than I expected. I think the community surprised me about how strong it is, but also it's been cool getting to know you and hiking with you. You know, I had no plan of hiking with anybody. I thought I was going to hike this alone, and over time, you and I sort of ended up more and more hiking it together. And I think it's worked out. And I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I
I've
have.
got to say, I really enjoyed it. I came away exactly the same, telling friends and family that I'd be on my own for a month.
Yeah.
But oddly, I've got to admit, every long trail I've done in the UK, you generally always end up meeting somebody and walking with them.
Right.
And for all I like the idea of walking on my own, I have enjoyed the social side of it. Definitely.
All right. Any final words?
No, hopefully I'm back soon.
All right. So let me give a few of my final thoughts. One, about the physical aspects of doing a hike like this. I guess I should have known this, but I learned that my body is not young anymore. Things like the sciatica I've had for years make it a lot harder to do a hike like this. I ended up relying on anti-inflammatory medications a lot more than I wanted to. And I wish I hadn't had to do that, but unfortunately, because of the way my body works these days, I did have to do that at times. And again, more often than I wanted to. As I think I mentioned earlier, I really did learn the value of 0 days or half days or Nero days to recuperate. And just like when you're doing any kind of weightlifting or other kinds of strenuous physical activity, you need breaks in between. And so you have to plan those into your trip. Foot care is another big issue to think about. I came away feeling pretty good about how things went. I had no major foot issues. I did have for a couple days a callus that got torn on the bottom of one foot that was painful for a couple of days, but then after that, it was fine. I had one blister, but it never popped, and it ended up just hardening on the side of one toe and kind of went away. And I ended up with one black toenail from stubbing my toe too many times. But honestly, none of these issues were major, and my feet were essentially fine throughout. One thing I do that I won't go into detail on this episode is I wear barefoot shoes, essentially, not the toe shoes, but I wear Vivo barefoot trail running shoes. And that's something I've hiked in for the last 15 years or so. So my body and feet are very used to doing that. And it doesn't create any other problems for me because I walk every day in barefoot shoes all the time. And what I mean by barefoot shoes are shoes that have a 0 drop heel and no extra support. In any event, I do think my feet have toughened up quite a bit over the years by wearing shoes with 0 drop and no extra support. And so I think that probably contributes to my feet not having major problems. Another thing I experienced physically is weight loss. I lost about 15 pounds on the hike. I've gained close to half of that back already since I've been home. It's hard to eat enough calories to maintain your weight when you're hiking 10 hours a day with several thousand feet of incline and decline. And everybody I hiked with also lost weight on the trail. So I don't think it was just me, in particular about the way I did my meals. I actually bring quite a bit of food, a lot more food than some of the people I hike with. So I was eating a lot of calories and yet still lost weight. So just expect that and don't skimp on food. Take as much as you can possibly need, and you will still need more. After a few weeks of hiking, you get to the point where you'll pretty much eat anything all the time. Another thing I learned is hiking a hike like this is just incredibly difficult. It's just hard. I think I've said that a few times, but that's the reality of it. It's not easy. There's nothing about it that's easy, but it's well worth it. The elevation makes it hard. The elevation gain and loss makes it hard. The weather makes it hard. Rocky trails make it hard on your feet. And not just for people who wear 0 support shoes, but even for people with, Hokas and other very supportive shoes, it can be very hard on your feet. That said, as I've said on other episodes, it's great to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And the experience is worth it. So the fact that it's really hard doesn't deter me from doing a trip like this again. In fact, it makes me want to do another trip like this. Another thing I've learned is that even though you may hike alone a lot, There's a strong community to support you. And I know I've already said this, but it is something I didn't expect and I've come away with. A lot of people out on the trail met other people and spent a significant time of the trail hiking with them. It was normal to see people hiking together for days or weeks and then learn that they had met on the trail. And as I said, the same thing happened to me in meeting Mick and Steve and some of the other folks that I hiked for significant periods of time with. Another thing that I came away with is how much confidence it can build to hike a trail like this. I know I can hike 500 miles. I could hike thousands of miles. I joked to myself on the trail that through hiking was hike, camp, no wash, no rinse, repeat. And that was sort of a slogan I came up with. And that turned out to be just fine with me and something I could continue to do. And lastly, I'll say that hiking a trail like this left hiking on the brain for me. And I don't just mean it left me wanting to plan more hikes, which of course it did, but it also left me dreaming about hiking. Literally, I would dream about hiking in the middle of the night. And that was actually a fun thing to be dreaming about, and woke up excited about doing more hiking. So those are some of my final thoughts. And I hope that I've inspired you to hike the Colorado Trail. And if you've enjoyed this episode, tell a friend about it, or better yet, give us a good review on whichever podcast service you use. And keep in mind that this podcast is entertainment and meant to spark your interest. If you decide to hike the trail, do your own research. Like anything else worth doing, outdoor adventure has risk. So when you go, pack your common sense. And when you get back, tell me how it went. I want to mention 2 upcoming episodes. First, we are going to have an episode on training. We'll do a deeper dive into training for a hike with a guest who makes a living coaching people to train for accomplishing their dream adventures. I hope to get that one out to you next before my next full episode on a different hike, but we'll see. But let me talk about the next trail we're going to cover. We're going to go to the northeastern United States for a wild and remote hike deep into the woods, where we'll pass lakes, skirt marshes, and cross rivers, and hike almost 140 miles on a trail that is celebrating its 100th anniversary. We'll be tent camping or staying in lean-tos along the way, even though we are only a few hours' drive from America's most populous city. Next time on Trails Worth Hiking, probably after our special training episode, we'll travel to the Adirondacks of upstate New York, where we'll hike the Northville Placid Trail. If you have any questions or feedback on this episode, or ideas for future episodes, including if you want to be a guest and talk about a trail that you've hiked, reach out to me at trailsworthhiking@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Trailsworthhiking Podcast. So start planning your next hike, and before you know it, you'll be on the trail. Thanks for listening. I'm walking through the San Juans. It's windy. It's been a cold morning. Still cloud cover. I'm well above tree line, crisscrossing the Continental Divide. The area around me looks like alpine tundra mixed with soaring rocky ledges and peaks and mesas. As far as I can tell, I'm the only one in a pretty long valley. I'm the only person out here. The scenery this morning has been completely amazing. And the added cold and wind and clouds have made this place look almost like Mordor. I'm gonna take a break pretty soon, have a snack.